to another episode of Alumni Updates. I'm your host, Jason Holcomb, and today we're joined by 1971 graduate, world-class referee who's doing everything from the Final Four to the Olympics, and a 2017 National Women's Basketball Hall of Fame inductee, Smalley Bell. Miss Sally, welcome to the show.
Oh, thanks. Nice to be here.
Well, you know, if at any point I used a cliche I read somewhere, that's actually code for I read it on Scott Thompson's blog. So I'm going to go ahead and put that out there. And so every time that I say that, which is probably going to be frequently because he did such a great job of telling your story several years ago, I'll probably put some little bell and some little flashy thing on the interview that says, look, just, you know, for attribution's sake. But tell me, when you think about your life and your career, we have to go way back. And you teased me before we got started that going too far back, we might run into some log jams as far as the memory machine, seeing how good it was clicking, but hopefully it'll do good enough. But, you know, Scott mentioned, you know, I read somewhere that Pete Maravich was somewhat of an idol of yours in the 1960s, but I want to know, was basketball already a part of your life then in some fashion, or did that perpetuate into a love for basketball?
Oh, basketball was already there before Pete Maravich. Absolutely. I can remember when I was in the 7th grade, I got my first pair of Chuck Taylor basketball shoes. You know, that was the high tops back in the day, and that was a real special event. So I remember that very much. And the Dublin Recreation Department, they had a program for girls, and actually that was the only thing that was available for women at the time for girls was basketball.
It's funny. My wife's grandmother, who's since passed, she actually played for Wilkinson County back a long time ago. And it's funny, her name was Shirley Helton, and she talked about the half court game and some of the rule differences than what we see today. And tell me for a second to let everyone else know, what kind of basketball game would they see if they went back in time and watched you play? I want to hear in your own words what it looked like back then.
Well, it was half court when I played until my senior year in high school. And then they went to a rover, and that didn't last that long either. It was, and I played defense. I was a guard. So you had 3 forwards and 3 guards, and that was our configuration for basketball. So, and then in my senior year, when they went to rover, you had to shoot your own shots, and it was 2 people were playing full court and 2 on each end. So it was a great transition. And actually, we weren't that good at the time when I played. Our record, you can look at our record in high school. It was not very good, but I tell you, we had people that just loved the game, and that's where the love of basketball started for me.
Now, obviously, when you graduated in 71, you know, you ended up going to UGA. But before we go deep into the basketball side of things, I wanted to talk for a second about your time at Dublin City Schools. And, you know, everybody, I can tell you offhand some of the teachers and experiences that impacted me. But are there any that come to mind in particular, whether it's on the basketball court, you know, a lesson that was learned, or, you know, I'll tell you an officiating story here in a little while involving Shelley Stroman that might get you to chuckle a little bit. But what were some of those people and those circumstances in school that really impacted you and helped you as you continued on your journey?
Well, Caroline Russell Johnson, she was Russell when she was my English teacher. She coached the B team, which I played on it to start with. And then, of course, Billy Johnson was a big force in my life too. So both of them were instrumental. And then Butch Miller, Coach Butch Miller was my homeroom teacher, and he was a big part of it. And Jim Richardson, Coach Richardson, I had him for biology, and he was just one of my all-time favorites because he was coaching the boys when I was there. So those people were instrumental. And Ben Snipes, he was also a little out of a fish out of water, I guess you could say, coaching girls. But it was such an interesting time for me, and it was a different coach every single year. I never had the same coach. So I learned a lot. That's truly learned a lot.
Well, I can imagine having a different coach every year. I teased because when I went to Dublin, we had a different principal every year. We literally every year we had a different principal, and so they talk about learning different management styles. I imagine for you that might have been helpful when you started having to deal with all these different coaching personalities out on the court as a referee, because you and I both know that no two coaches are alike. So I can imagine that probably had to help a little bit, knowing that what's motivating them and how to keep them in line and keep the game moving. Because obviously that's one of your main responsibilities. I remember Shelley Stroman told us when I went to recreation officiating school, it's not supposed to be about you. If you become the centerpiece of the game, then you're not doing your job. You're supposed to be helping the game move at its natural pace. Now you have to make those calls and you have to, make sure people are following the rules. But if it ever becomes everybody staring at you, then you're not doing your job. So I imagine for you, you probably used some of that and applied that to all these different coaches that you faced, or I don't want to say faced, but you dealt with across the years.
Oh yeah. And I never really thought of it in that content, but honestly, that's very astute. That's true. It really did serve me well.
Well, it's funny you bring up, Coach Richardson's one of my buddies. I love Coach Richardson. Whenever I used to go exercise at the gym here in town, he was one of my old friends that I talked about because he was a friend and he was old. And we still talk on the phone every once in a while. The other day I called him to tell him that another former student had mentioned his name. And when he picked up the phone, he was joking because he thought I was a telemarketer. He didn't recognize my number. And he said, "Sorry, we're eating dinner." I said, "Coach." And he said, "What?" I said, "This is Jason." "Jason, why are you calling right now?" I said, "Well, I got something I need to tell you." And, we had a good chat and all, but yeah, I love hearing about all these people and how they touch lives. And so, when you moved on from high school, you went to UGA and again, I read somewhere that you ended up at the Habersham County Rec Department. And that's where serendipity kind of came into play concerning your first officiating job. Talk about that for a minute. What was that like?
Well, yeah, and I mentioned earlier the recreation department. Roy Hammond was somebody that started so much in Dublin. So I give kudos to him too, because he was a mentor. But I was working there, and they one night the referees didn't show up, and it was the Pee Wee. We were a small department, and I was running the basketball program. So I had to put on a whistle that night. And so, and I wasn't very good. I did not know anything that I was doing. I was just a young, thinking I could do anything person. But anyway, the coach started really giving me a hard time. And so I said, okay. I walked up to him and I said, "You know what? I may not be right, but you're not going to sit here and yell at us. Either sit down and be quiet or leave." And he didn't say another word. And I thought, that's pretty good. And so the next morning I was in the office and I was talking about it to our director, and he said, "You know who that is?" And I said, "No." And he said, his name was Cecil Huff, who became a mentor of mine too. And he's head of the high school officiating association. So I said, "Oh my goodness." And so then 30 minutes later, I get a phone call from Cecil. And he asked me to join North Georgia Mountains Association and Georgia Mountain Association. And there'd never been a woman before. And he asked me to join. And that was the start of everything I did.
Wow.
I know. It was something special. It was something special. And
that's amazing.
I met my husband through that too, and through basketball. And Cecil was the best man in our wedding. So
wow. So the guy that you fussed at helped put you on your path for your family and your career.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Wow. Wow.
Yeah.
So it's proof positive that if you stand up for what you believe in those moments, that moment of conviction could translate into some other successes down the road. That's pretty cool.
Yeah, it was. It was special. It was meant to be, I do believe.
Well, I can tell you one thing. I was not meant to be a basketball official. I called soccer games. Basketball was my first love and soccer was second. And I officiated soccer here locally for several years. And I had one of the rec department people, Spook Spivey, tell me, Jason, why don't you do basketball? You're always here at Stubbs Gym. You might as well. And so I went to go to the class, and Shelley Stroman, one of the legendary people of Dublin, and probably still the best scratch golfer in these parts, was our instructor. And so I go in there and I'm thinking I know basketball. I mean, I play it and I watch it all the time. Well, he starts doing all the different hand motions and running through the rule book, and you need to do this, and you need to make sure that your shirt is like this and your pants this and this type of shoe and this. We're watching these videos and I'm going, my word, like this is crazy. And so I paid attention, but at the same time I'm going, I'm going to be calling little kids basketball games. How hard can that be? They let them travel, for crying out loud. I mean, it can't be. And so, my first game, Saturday morning, I go out to Stubbs Park Gym, and I've got all my uniform on, and I got my whistle, and, it's one of those fancy whistles y'all are supposed to have that's loud and obnoxious so that it always yes, it has to get, he specified exactly what brand to get. Don't get anything else. And so I'm out there, and 5 minutes in, I've got parents hollering at me, do I know what I'm talking about? And I've got the coaches, are you ever going to call anything? And again, these are kids who are allowed to pick up the ball and sprint with it. And I realized at that very moment that my basketball officiating career was going to be cut short. And I made sure to let them know about 2 or 3 more games in that I was pretty well done. I wasn't any good at it, and I accepted my failure. I took the L, so to speak, and I moved on from it.
Well, you had the experience. A lot of people have, that's for sure.
Well, obviously you had a much different experience, and you talked about, meeting your husband, Jack, and he even officiated at the high school level from what I understand, but it seems like there's certain moments in your life where certain people or opportunities present themselves, and it just leads you into this next phase. Talk about the doing the JUCO tournaments and how that translated into that next big leap in your career.
Well, the high school, my high school career got me generated and starting, and for the love of it. So eventually I decided to go to camps, and they had referee camps, and that had never been. I mean, that was the inception of it in the 80s. And so I went to a camp in Milledgeville, Georgia, and once again, only female. They didn't have any females, and people saw me, and that kind of put my foot in the door. And plus Jack, he was officiating too, and he officiated college ball too, but men's. So anyway, I had my foot in the door there. And then one other camp, I said, I like this camp stuff. So I'm going to do this again. And there was one in San Diego. And I took Referee Magazine. I joined everything I could join about basketball. And this camp was great. It was Irv Brown's camp. And I said, okay, I want to go there. And I said, Jack, do you think they'd let me go? And he said, send them money. They don't turn money down.
That's wise advice.
I know. I sent a check with it, and I got a call back from them, and they said, we think you've signed up for the wrong thing. And I said, no. And they said, well, we're not responsible for the language. And I said, I can handle that. And I said, this is what I want to do. And Irv Brown, actually, and I don't know if you know who Irv Brown is, but he was a dominant men's official. Final Four, did so many things early, and you could Google him and see all the stuff he does. He did. But he became a mentor. So and
Wow.
when I went out there, it was just I worked as hard as I knew how to work. So that's what really led to my start of my collegiate career. And then I worked junior college. I worked every kind of ball you could work. There wasn't any ball I turned down. So I certainly just loved all of that. And I did my first national tournament was in Senatobia, Mississippi. And it was
Where?
Senatobia. And Senatobia is right below Memphis. It's really below the Tennessee line, right in North
Gotcha.
Mississippi. And they had a tournament there. And then I connected with so many people there that their career was just starting. And I'm talking about coaches. Jim Davis won. He was at
Wow.
Rome. And you know who was at Rome State? Andy Landers. That was where he first
Wow.
started. And he had gone to Georgia, and Jim Davis had gone to Rome State. So you never know where things, I mean, they're so
No.
good. Amazing.
That's what I love about this program is showing basically the 6 degrees of separation. You know, again, there are so many people that are not going to be familiar with your career and the fact that you graduated from Dublin High School. You know, when I tell people about some of the folks that I've spoke with, you know, different doctors, attorneys, famous athletes, you know, I talked with a fella named Joey Giuliano the other day.
Oh, yeah,
And, you know, he's big deal Hollywood guy, but still as down to earth as they come. And I love that so much. And again, you're a trailblazer, whether you want to admit it or accept it, you're a trailblazer. You know, there weren't women in your roles. And, you know, like now for the Super Bowl, you know, there's going to be a female official this weekend. What does that mean to you? I know this is shifting off of your career for a little bit, but what does it mean to you as a female official and a trailblazer to see this transition and these opportunities available to women?
Well, it's just huge. I mean, for everyone. And to see the example that she's going and doing is amazing, and that you can achieve it. You know, before it was never even a realistic goal that women could do such things, you know, as far as the Super Bowl or the NBA or any of this. The women in women's basketball officiating are still minorities. They're still a minority in that group. So it's more and more, and doors are open. So it's just great. I applaud them all.
Yeah, I get so excited at the possibility. You know, I have 3 daughters that, you know, opportunities continue to open for them, and not just from an athletic standpoint and not just from the officiating side, but just in general that, you know, we talk about providing opportunities for everyone. That to me is what separates America from so many other places, because there's so many other places where those opportunities will never exist.
Absolutely.
And I know that, you know, our country's not perfect and we've still got, you know, growth, but the fact that we can realize that growth is fantastic. And so, you know, again, you seeing your career grow into what it did. I mean, when I ask this, it's kind of a rhetorical question, but did you ever expect to be on the court? You know, I think back now, because I used to watch the women's Final Four back when, you know, sometimes it was tape delayed back in the day. Sometimes it was on these weird times. I remember when Stanford was so dominant, and watching those in the early 90s, I would say, and it would be on like at, you know, 10 o'clock. This when I was still in California, it'd be on like at 10 o'clock in the morning, which would be like 1 o'clock on a Saturday, you know, when, you know, back then people weren't making time to watch that. It was just on. And to think that
1990, that was Stanford won the national championship, played in Knoxville, Tennessee. That was my first national championship game. I worked.
See, so I watched you. I watched you doing your work. And, you know, I was pulling for Stanford because I lived in Sacramento at the time. So, you know, not far away, but so that small world, I was watching you on the TV and didn't even realize it.
Well, you know, in Stanford, what a program they've had. And I'm once again, another connection. I traveled with them 4 years later internationally and traveled with the team over to France on a tour. So you never know where things are going to hook up. But one thing I do want to say about women, Title IX was huge. It gave women such opportunities, not just in athletics, but because of me. I wasn't an athlete, but it affected my whole career. And gave me opportunities that never would have happened if Title IX hadn't been implemented.
Well, tell me about that first Final Four. What was that? Did you have any nerves, or were you? I mean, how did you approach that? Because I know for players, obviously, when you have big games, there's a certain way, but I never think about how officials approach these big games.
Well, that was back in the day. We worked 2-person crews, not 3-person crews. And that was my second Final Four, but it was my first championship game. And they played Auburn. And so I worked in the SEC a lot. So I'd seen them, and I'd had Stanford before. To say I was a raw nerve, you wouldn't believe. But, you know, once you throw the ball up and they get going, you just kick it into what you do.
Well, and that, you know, to me, it's funny, you know, our football team won the state championship, not this past year, but the year prior.
Yeah.
And to me, what was so amazing about those kids is they had, when it was time for business, they were all business. And it was funny because they were so good at focusing that they were also able to relax, if that makes sense. You know, when they were on the sidelines, they were still joking and cutting up, but when they got in between the hashes there, that, you know, it was all business. And I don't know if you've been following our basketball teams this year, but, you know, our Irish and Lady Irish are state ranked. The boys are 1 or 2, and the girls are actually number 3 in the state currently, and actually just recently had a win streak broken that was double digits. So a far cry from your days on the basketball court.
I have been, you know, I check the records out. I do see that, and I'm always pulling for Dublin for sure.
Well, we've got to get you on. You know, we have the NFHS provides the live stream game, so we've got to get you connected there so that you can watch the games here, especially when we get into the playoffs in the next 2 weeks. Because my hope is, you know, in 2004, 2005, both our teams made the Final Four, which obviously had never happened previously. You know, we've had some really strong girls basketball teams. You know, Charlene James is probably considered like the best women's basketball player that ever played at Dublin. And then I could go through my Mount Rushmore, but I'm not going to bore you with that. But when you started making the Final Four a regular habit, do they grade you? Is that something that, you know, because I know like for certain officiating crews, you get graded across the year, and then you'll have, you know, you're never working with the same people when it comes to these tournaments. You end up getting paired with this guy got a 95, you got a 93, and she got a 91. You guys work together. How did that work?
Well, you know, every single game, you get nominated by conferences is the process. Officials are nominated because I ended up being a coordinator later on, so I know all of this now. But you're nominated, and then you get game assignments, and then after that, there's a committee at each site that evaluates the officiating crew, and they recommend whether you go on or strongly. There's a lot of things that are considered, but it's a recommendation from that committee, and then the NCAA does everything in their office. And then you move on every time. And that starts in the first round, second round, regionals, and then to the Final Four. So it's that process every single time, every year. And it starts over with every new tournament.
Was there any Final Four in particular that stands out as your best experience as an official? And I don't necessarily want to say like you called the best game of your life, because I don't know how that goes. I've never, you know, been in the zone as an official, but was there any 1 or 2 tournaments where you saw the women's game transitioning? Because obviously now when you watch the women play, the level of intensity and athleticism to me is unlike anything I've seen in a long time. You know, I watch these women, and they, in so many respects, they're as competitive as anybody. And, you know, to be able to, you know, was there any moment like that where you saw, wow, I'm watching something different here than I did before?
And I guess Pat Summitt was one of the things that really inspired me, and I saw history as it was unfolding and with what all she did. because my first Final Four was in Tacoma, Washington in 1988. And I didn't have Tennessee, but they played. And then I skipped a year in 89. And then 90, I went for 14 more years to Final Fours. And so when I saw Tennessee, what they had done and what she had done, and I'd had her the first time that I had her in the national championship, that team had been the three Pete's, the Samika Randall and Tamika, and the three Pete's anyway. They lost to Arkansas and during the regular season, and I had that game. And she moved them out of their dressing room completely at Tennessee and Knoxville. So anyway, but long story short, they won the national championship, and that was so impressive to me what she did. And I felt like I was not the show. I was just part of it, an instrument to let them shine. And same way with UConn. Connecticut, what he has done has been most amazing. I wouldn't say he's my favorite coach, but, but what I would say is you can't deny what he has done to women's basketball and the program. And so I had so many Tennessee UConn matchups during the years and all of that. But when you talk about Final Fours and stuff, collegiately, there's one thing, and this is more internationally, that stood out. I saw Teresa Edwards play. I worked the World Championships in Malaysia, and of course I couldn't work the US, but I saw her play, and she was by far the best female basketball player I had ever seen in my life. And I watched every game she played there. And that stood out in my mind more than probably any of the other Final Fours.
Wow. That to me is so neat to think about Malaysia like that. I've been across the country. I've been to Michigan, and I've been to Arizona and Texas and Utah, but I've never left North America, and I've never left the United States. And I never thought, that to think that your career would take you literally halfway across the globe. I imagine that young woman in Habersham County was not sitting there going, one day I'm going to be in Malaysia blowing this whistle.
Not even close. That never even entered my mind. That's for sure.
Now, I read somewhere, Dee Cantor one time was quoted as saying, when I talk to prospective female officials, I tell them you don't have to be that perfect athlete. And I'm sitting there going, that's like, I don't know how to say it. I don't know what to say to that, because she said, look at Sally Bell. She looks like a housewife out there. But here's the thing. I looked at some of those photos and some of those referee magazine covers. You did not look, you look like my housewife when I don't do right. You didn't look like a housewife. What would you consider your demeanor when you were out there on the court calling a game?
Well, you have to be, you have to follow a strict line to begin with. And I think that's important. But I felt like my strong suit was my ability to listen and my ability to communicate. And I think that's where I came in. And, everybody has different style of refereeing. Everyone does. And so my style seemed to work. So I kept going with what worked for me. Dee is a totally different person and a referee, and still refereeing. And of course, I don't know if you know Dee, she was one of two women, the first women in the NBA. I worked the championship game in, it was Tennessee and Georgia, as a matter of fact, in Charlotte. And there were three of us on that game. And of course, it was me, it was Dee Cantor, and it was Violet Palmer. Now, Dee and Violet Palmer were the two referees in the NBA. And I was the crew chief. So I like that, because I thought it was funny. They did a great job, and they were great officials. And I supported them so much. And I was so excited for them to be Blazers with the NBA.
Now, I also heard tell of the Olympics. What was that experience like? Because that's a whole that's a different basketball. I try to tell people that's a whole, that the rule set and the weird lanes and, it's a whole different animal.
And it is. I had a lot of tours that I took before I got the Olympic assignment because, I started off in Taiwan doing the Jones Club Cup, and then I went to Spain. I did the Junior World Championships in Spain. I went there twice. I did the World University Games in Russia. So I had a lot of experience in that, and it is totally a different game. And once again, there weren't women. Internationally, they had never had women at all. And so the United States was very, Bill Wall, who was in USA Basketball, he supported women's basketball a great deal. And I'll always be thankful to him for all of that, that set he set the stage for women, because now women are more internationally all over. But I actually I thought I was in line for the 92 Olympics in Barcelona, but I didn't get it. So it was a very big disappointment, but that's okay, because I got the 96 in Atlanta.
That's what I was going to say.
My whole family got to be there. So it once again, it worked out just perfect.
Well, as we get ready to call it a day, one thing that I always try to do is ask the different people, in your case, what would you tell those young girls and those young women in our schools right now? I mean, the things that you have done and accomplished, including getting inducted into the Hall of Fame, I didn't want to make light of that, and that encompassed your entire career. That wasn't, just officiating, from what I understand, all the stuff that you did with the SEC and everything else, you made a generous contribution to the sport of basketball. But what do you tell those girls right now that are thinking about doing something that maybe no woman has ever done before? I mean, I know I don't know that you necessarily set out to be, quote, a trailblazer. You just knew what you enjoyed and what you wanted to do. What would you tell them?
Keep the door open. Always know that there are possibilities of any and everything. I think that was the thing that helped me the most. I just thought there was nothing I couldn't try. I couldn't, and now I might not succeed, but I couldn't at least give it my best effort. And so know that those doors are always open for you, and just work the hardest you possibly can.
Well, as we've all seen, we've just recently had a woman elected to the second highest office in the country. So, I get excited at the possibility that, anyone in our nation has the opportunity to be vice president or president, just like I would say that sometimes you talk about leaving the door open. Well, sometimes you got to put your foot down there toward the bottom so it doesn't get shut on you to begin with. And I think that's what you did in a couple instances that you described, whether it was going to the camp in San Diego or any of those experiences globally, where it would have been easy for you to sit there and say, you know what, they don't really want women. They're not looking. No, you didn't look at it that way. You said, well, I'm going to go do this and see what happens. So, I guess those Chuck Taylors did help out at times.
They did.
Now, to close things out, I just want to tell you how much I appreciate the time that you've given us, particularly to be able to share with all the young women in our school system your story and how your time with Dublin affected that. Is there anything else that you wanted to add before we call it a day about inspiring these young women who, could be on the court in the coming weeks, or, maybe they want to try their hand at getting yelled at by coaches like you did for so long?
Well, if you love what you do, and I love basketball. Now, I was mediocre at best, probably skill wise, but nobody loved it as much as I did. At least that's the way I perceived it. Go with your passion and just keep going at it. Never stop. That was what I would suggest to all of them. In Dublin, what a wonderful place to grow up and to attend school. And the people that touch my lives, I'll never repay them.
Well, Miss Sally, it's been such a pleasure having you today, and I want to wish you well and hope that Dublin is a place that you're not a stranger to once we can get all the pandemic beyond us to where we can all fellowship, because I think it'd be awesome for you to get to come speak to our girls basketball team, or just to any of the kids for that matter. Because, you know, I always like showing people that no matter what you want to do in life, you know, Dublin City Schools is going to get you ready for it.
Absolutely. And do hook me up with, I would love to watch the basketball, the high school, you know, online. So
We will get that situated for you so that you can watch those games, because it is a lot of fun. And the thing that I think you'll love is that they play a lot of good defense. So basically like what you started, you know, as a guard, you know, nowadays guards don't do as much guarding as they used to, you know, especially when you get into the higher up levels. You know, they just need to call them 3-pointers, because that's mostly what they like to do now. They just want to stand behind that line. And I had Randy Clark yelled at me one time in a church basketball game because I kept trying to shoot a 3-pointer. And he said, Jason, you're 15-footer, you never miss. Why are you going to step back further and miss every one of them? I'd rather have 2 points than no points. So shoot the 15 a footer. And anybody who knew Mr. Randy knows that he didn't say it, even though it was church league basketball, it wasn't necessarily the most polite language at the moment. He was trying to get his point across, and I took it.
Sure, absolutely.
Well, Miss Sally, thank you so much for joining us, and we wish you well and look forward to seeing you soon.
Okay, thanks, Jason. Appreciate it.
Thank you, ma'am.